welcome back to another episode of the Tech Talks Daily podcast. And today I'm going to be hosting Bill Ledingham, CEO of a company called Fairwinds, which is a company dedicated to creating software that empowers Kubernetes platform engineers to standardize and enable development best practices. And as Gartner predicts, by 2026, 80% of software engineering organizations will establish platform teams to provide reusable services, components, and tools for application delivery. I think this is an incredibly important conversation. So Bill's going to share insights into the challenges that platform teams might be facing, and also how Fairwinds software helps overcome issues by making developers' lives easier. And he'll also discuss the benefits for developers, including automated assistance based on established guardrails, including development velocity and maintaining security and compliance. All those key things that excite developers around the world. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way stateside, where Bill is waiting to talk about his story and why they're leading the charge in helping organizations achieve Kubernetes done right, and discover how Fairwinds is revolutionizing the way platform teams work with containerized apps on production-grade infrastructure at scale. But enough from me. Let's get Bill on the podcast now. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Bill. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Hi, Neil. Well, thanks very much for the opportunity to be here today. Just a quick way of my background. I've done a number of startup companies over the years, from the early days of AI, doing speech recognition, natural language understanding, then on to virtualization, cybersecurity, open source. And now today I'm currently CEO of a company called Fairwinds.
Fantastic. And there's so much I'm looking forward to talking with you about today. But before we do, I'd love to set the scene for our conversation today. So can you give everyone listening an overview of Fairwinds, what it is, its mission, and also explain why the Kubernetes platform engineering is so crucial for modern software development, just for anyone listening outside of the industry?
So first and foremost, we provide software and services to help enable companies deploy and manage cloud-native applications at scale. And so what do I mean by cloud native and all these different buzzwords? Well, in essence, cloud native technology is really kind of the latest and greatest way of deploying applications. If you kind of trace through the history of computing from mainframes to servers to virtual machines, now cloud native is really kind of the next step in that progression. And what it refers to is really a way of building and deploying applications in a construct known as a container on cloud infrastructure. And that layer within the cloud infrastructure is really, it's known as Kubernetes. That's become really the de facto standard for running and deploying containerized applications. And briefly, Kubernetes was a technology originally developed by Google and then made available as open source. So if you look at most of the cloud platforms today, ranging from AWS to Microsoft Azure to Google's cloud platform, they all support Kubernetes as a way of deploying applications that have been really architected to run in containers.
And Kubernetes does have a bit of a reputation for being incredibly complex too. So how does Fairwinds Insights address the challenges of Kubernetes complexity and also help both platform teams and developers in the process of doing things like deploying and managing containerized applications, etc.?
Sure. So Kubernetes itself, it's a very powerful technology. It has a number of built-in capabilities for starting and stopping containers, making sure that the overall environment is there 24/7, that it's secure, that it's reliable, etc. But in the ideal world, the developer could just put an application in a container, toss it over to the platform engineering team. They would deploy it in Kubernetes and everything would be fantastic and secure, reliable, cost efficient, etc. The challenge comes down to how those containers are configured to run in Kubernetes. There is some complexity involved there to make sure that those containers are running securely, cost efficiently, etc. And so what we help platform engineering teams do is really enable developers to do the right thing when it comes to building and deploying those containers. So we kind of help the developers kind of shepherd those containers through the DevOps process from inception to deployment. We're kind of looking across, inspecting those containers as they're getting developed. So we're able to look into the container, look at the configuration information in there, scan the container for any open source vulnerabilities that may exist there, and then provide actionable feedback to developers so that they can address any issues that we find. So think of us as kind of monitoring the overall development lifecycle. As developers check in new versions of the code, we're scanning the code, looking for issues, providing immediate feedback to any issues that we find. We're also built into customers' CI/CD process as they build and package the containers. And then we're also acting in the runtime environment to ensure that there are no issues popping up there pertaining to security or cost efficiency, reliability, etc. So it's really kind of an end-to-end platform that's monitoring the process, finding issues, and then delivering actionable feedback to developers so that they can address those issues.
And I suspect for many business leaders listening, there's so many different solutions out there. It's slightly a crowded market, and knowing which is better suited to them can be challenging as well. So what would you say are some of the key features of Fairwinds Insights that make it stand out from, let's say, other Kubernetes management solutions in the market at the moment?
Yeah, so we have really kind of embraced the notion of open source in the cloud native community. If you just look at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation and all the various open source projects that are kind of maintained, supported there, etc., open source technology has really been a foundational element of this new wave of cloud computing. And so we've really embraced that notion in terms of how we are architecting and building and managing our software solutions in the space. So we've embraced the notion of open source. We contribute a number of open source projects to the CNCF. And then open source is really the foundation for our SaaS application, in that we're leveraging both our own open source software as well as best-of-breed third-party open source from the cloud native community. We package that together into a platform and then integrate that platform with all the other DevOps tools that are popular in the marketplace. Everything from GitHub and GitLab on the software repo side to the leading CI/CD solutions to things like Slack for notifications or PagerDuty for generating alerts, etc. So what we are trying to do is really operationalize a lot of best-of-breed technology or open source technology at scale and tie into the environments that developers are already leveraging for how they're building applications.
Just to bring that to life a little bit more, if we were to drill down on everything you were talking about there and look at some, let's say, universal problems experienced in business, how does Fairwinds Insights help organization enforce things like consistency, implementing policies, and ultimately reducing time spent on code reviews too?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And I think if we kind of trace back how a lot of Kubernetes and containers have been adopted by organizations, there was certainly a lot of buzz and hype a few years back. That got a number of companies interested in the technology. And really kind of the initial phase that they went through was to have different development teams kind of exploring the technology, playing around with it, if you will, to try it out on one or two applications. And so in that process, they've kind of cobbled together different solutions that address the different pain points they've run into. In a lot of cases, leveraging some of the open source from the cloud native community. Now, kind of as companies are going through the next phase where they're really trying to launch this technology at scale and support multiple different development teams deploying into multiple Kubernetes clusters, they are now running into the challenge, well, how do I really operationalize this technology at scale and ensure that things are done consistently from one development team to the next, from one Kubernetes cluster to the next? And that's kind of where we're stepping in to solve some of these challenges. We're giving them visibility through these best-of-breed open source tools, and then making the issues that we find actionable back to developers through the integration with these other existing DevOps tools to kind of bring everything together end to end. And really kind of our mission is to automate as much as possible through that process. So if there are issues that we find that we can simply create or fix code in an automated fashion, then we'll generate a pull request to GitHub. So that's a way of kind of checking in the corrected code, and then a developer simply needs to review that and approve the pull request. In other cases where we're not able to do it in an automated fashion, we'll give developers very specific remediation guidance as to what the issue is and then how they need to address it. So for example, if it's a vulnerability in an open source component that they're using, we'll tell them the version of the open source component where that issue has been fixed and kind of point them to the repo where they can then download that updated version. So we really want to kind of speed up developers through this process, make it easy for them to do the right thing, and kind of get them out of the way of having to respond to issues from the security team or other parts of the organization. This has always been a challenge around cybersecurity. A lot of the issues really boil down to how developers are building and configuring the code. And as a result, there's been kind of this back and forth between security teams and developers. That spawned the whole thing around DevSecOps and trying to build in better code earlier on and build security into the process. We're trying to take that really the next step further and further facilitate the path for developers to do the right thing.
And I'm glad you not just mentioned the business value of what you offer, but also bringing the developers into the conversation. Steve Ballmer famously said many years ago, the future is about developers, 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 developers. But in what other ways does Fairwinds improve that developer experience and providing automated help, remediation suggestions, and integration with other familiar tools that they might have?
Yeah, so think of it as we're kind of looking over their shoulder and making sure that they're following best practices and doing the right thing. And where they're not, we'll kind of point that out and then educate them on what is the best practice. So how do you configure the container to make sure it's running reliably? Things like making sure you have liveness and readiness probes in there so that Kubernetes can do the right thing when it sees an issue and then restarting the container. Making sure that they have the right resource recommendations configured in the container so that, they're really able to optimize the underlying cloud resources that they're using and not overspending on the cloud, nor underspending and causing performance or reliability issues. So we're really trying to kind of work with them hand in hand, educate them on Kubernetes and best practices for how you deploy containers into Kubernetes, and kind of get them over the hurdle that this is still a relatively new technology that a number of developers don't have experience with. So we want to kind of help them do the right thing, making sure that they're deploying applications securely, cost-effectively, and reliably.
And when I was doing a little research on you guys, I also read that you provide visibility into Kubernetes resource usage and help organizations better optimize their spending on their containerized infrastructure. And we are in a period of economic uncertainty at the moment. A lot of businesses and IT departments are challenged with doing more with less. Can you expand on that for me?
Yeah, so that has a big recent focus for us, just given the uncertainty in the economy as companies look to cut their spending in different areas. Cloud spend has become a recent focus for many organizations because of the large adoption of the cloud and kind of the fact that it hasn't really been managed closely by many organizations. Many companies have seen their cloud spend go up dramatically over the past few years. And a lot of that has to do with the lack of focus there on making sure developers are using the cloud efficiently, but not spinning up too many applications in the cloud that they don't need to, and then really making sure that they have the applications configured correctly to only use the resources that they actually need. And so particularly in the area of Kubernetes from a resource utilization perspective is somewhat of a black box. It's very hard to tell what workloads are using what resources within Kubernetes. And so we've added capabilities as of late to really kind of drill into that black box and give companies visibility to how much each application or workload is using in terms of the underlying resources around CPU, memory, et cetera, and then help developers optimize their use of those resources. So we look at kind of historical usage patterns in combination with kind of the criticality of the workload, like is it mission critical or is this just kind of a supporting tool used within the infrastructure? So based on kind of the quality of service that the application or workload needs, combined with what the application has actually used over a certain period of time, we can come up with very specific recommendations over, what that container should request in terms of CPU and memory. And so the way in which Sage works, if you kind of drill into the technology, as I mentioned, it has a lot of great capabilities to auto-scale applications. So as a workload is getting more requests, it can automatically add additional compute, CPU, and memory resources to scale up the infrastructure to create additional images of that application. The challenge is for developers to use this functionality correctly. Within each container, they essentially have to make a reservation request, if you will, of how much resource that container needs for both CPU and memory. So they have to set these requests and limits for what that container needs. One challenge that we see across many companies, developers will over-provision a container, i.e. they'll request too much underlying resource, much more than what the application actually needs, because from a developer's perspective, they just want to get the application up and running. They don't really care about how much cloud resource they're using under the covers. And so in a lot of cases, we're finding these containers over-provisioned by about 30 to 40%. So there's some pretty significant savings there. If companies are spending $1 million or more a month on cloud resources, that becomes a pretty easy way to demonstrate some strong ROI and get some significant savings there.
You're doing so much at the moment, but where do you go from here? What does the future hold for Fairwinds, and how do you see the company's role evolving in this ever-changing world of Kubernetes and platform engineering? Because the world's moving so fast at the moment. So is there anything you can share about what you're working on in the future?
Yeah, so we've always kind of been blessed by having this combination of software and services. We have a services or managed services team that works closely with customers, helping them manage their infrastructure and really scaling that up and making sure everything's reliable, secure, et cetera. So that's really been a source of a lot of our innovation as we've come across different pain points in that process. A lot of our engineers have kind of developed solutions for those problems that they've run into. That's what we've made available as open source and out to the cloud native community, kind of embracing this notion of find a problem, fix a problem, share it with the community. And then on the software side, really kind of packaging together a lot of great technology that we see out there to solve these problems at scale for companies. So we're always on the lookout. What's the next big challenge as companies move forward with innovating around how they're using the cloud, how they're deploying applications in the cloud, what pain points are they running into, and then leveraging our customers to really solve that pain for them and then turn those solutions into software that we can help more customers on a broader scale also address those same pain points.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast today. I know how busy you are, so I can't thank you enough for sparing your time to chat with me today and share your story with everyone listening. So I want to see if there's something we can do for you, because some of the biggest names in business, VC funding and tech have either been guests on this podcast or listened to the show. So if I was to ask you, is there a person you'd love to have a private breakfast or lunch with, and why? Because he or she might just be listening to this. Who would you choose and why?
Well, that's actually a great question, Neil. I mean, in addition to Tech Talks, there's actually another podcast that I really enjoy and admire. And it's a podcast called All In. I'm not sure if you've heard it.
Yes.
But, there's 4 hosts there, Jason, Chamath, Sachs, and Freeberg. They have a very entertaining kind of repartee between the 4 of them. And they cover a mix of tech, business, geopolitics, etc. And I always enjoy that in terms of kind of what I'm able to learn, as well as just their perspective on a number of different topics. And I think, be very entertaining to go out to breakfast with the 4 of them and see what sort of conversation we could get into.
Consider it done, my friend. We will throw that request out into the podcast land universe and see what we can manifest together. Let me know if anything comes of it. But for anyone listening, just wanting to find out more information about Fairwinds, what's the best starting point for everything?
Sure. So obviously we have a website, fairwinds.com. I'm available on LinkedIn. Our company is available on LinkedIn. On our website, we have a number of resources in terms of just education around cloud native technology. We have pointers to our open source projects. We also include a free version of Fairwinds Insights, which is our SaaS solution. So that should be a great starting point for companies to learn more about the technology that we have and what we're supporting out there in the marketplace.
Well, I always say at the end of every episode that technology works best when it brings people together. And what I love about what you're doing here is how you're creating software for Kubernetes platform engineers to help them standardize and enable development best practices and bring everyone together. So a big thank you for taking the time to come on here and share your story today. Really appreciate it, Bill.
Well, thank you as well, Neil. Very much appreciate the opportunity, and it's been great chatting.
And that concludes another enlightening conversation. A big thank you to Bill, CEO of Fairwinds, for joining me on today's episode and for sharing his expertise and vision, and also shedding light on how Fairwinds Insights is transforming the way organizations are managing containerized applications. If anything you'd like to add to today's conversation, please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, @Neil C. Hughes. Let me know. We'll keep this conversation going. And I invite you to join me again tomorrow, where we'll have another engaging interview with a tech leader or innovator as we continue to explore the ever-changing technology landscape here on Tech Talks Daily together. So a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.